Hello, I'm Andrea Lipinski.
And I'm Keith DeCandido. Welcome to the wild and woolly world of the Chronic Rift. Tonight we'll be dealing with a popular plot device in science fiction, literature, TV, and movies, the time paradox. Whether it works, how it works, why it works, that'll be later on the Roundtable discussion.
But we can't do that until we fill you in on the latest Colmini Watch. As it completes its first year, the Colmini Watch has compiled an extensive list of the character actors' roles, but we're not finished yet. We discovered our old buddy Colm in the film The Commitments. He plays the father of the band's manager who believes that Elvis is God, and he gives a hilarious impersonation of the king. The movie is still playing in area theaters. As a service to our viewers, the Chronic Rift will, from time to time, fill you in on clubs and activities that are going on. This bulletin board is free for anyone's use. If you have a notice you'd like us to post concerning a club or event, please write to us here at the Rift. And now we would like to welcome Marc Macagnone to our program. Marc was on our program last season on our Play-by-Mail episode. As a reviewer for Paper Mayhem, a major play-by-mail publication, Marc joins us tonight to fill us in on the latest in this unique field.
Hello, I'm Marc Macagnone, and welcome to PBM's In Review. Today's review will be on Politic. Remember when you and your friends played a game called Risk? Well, I found a game that's simple to play, exciting, and filled with strategy and diplomacy. Just like Risk, with a few twists. The rulebook is 27 pages of simple-to-understand rules. It covers everything from infantry to killer satellites, A-6s to F-14s, patrol subs to aircraft carriers, how they attack and defend your territories. The rules are broken down into 5 main sections and 3 subsections. I urge you to read everything. If you don't, you may find yourself destroyed on the very first turn. Here's a hint. Watch out for naval invasions. You will be up against 11 other players, each bent on the total domination of the world. Each player starts out in a country somewhere on the global map. The countries are America, Argentina, Algeria, Australia, South Africa, China, Egypt, Germany, India, Turkey, Venezuela, and Russia. Each country starts out with a certain number of build points, ranging from 38 to 50. Combat is simple and to the point. You either win or you lose. No prisoners are taken. Here's another hint. Watch your tech and support units. They will give you bonuses on your attacks and defenses, ranging from 2 points to as high as 50 points. This is a very fast-paced game. Each turn will bring surprise and tactical moves that will change your strategies instantly. The game master is Carl Zeitzmitz. He is known for his open-mindedness and the ability to explain the rules thoroughly. If you have a problem, call him. He'll help you. Now for my ratings. 1 star equals poor, 5 stars excellent. Playability, 4.5. Diplomacy, 4. Very important to have allies in this game. GM response, 5. Complexity, 4. Fun index, 5. Rulebook, 4. Overall rating for this game, 4.75 stars. If interested, contact Carl Zeitzmitz at 1412 Croxton, apartment A11, Bloomington, Illinois, 61701. So until next time, good gaming.
And now with this week's comic art questions, comments, and constructive criticism is Keith DeCandido.
Well, not too constructive, I hope. Welcome back to Comic Art Commentary. And here is some news. Penguin is a fairly well-known book publisher, and they've also lately been getting into comic books. They've been publishing Francoise Mouly and Art Spiegelman's anthology Raw for a couple of years now. You can tell when they started doing it because it went from a huge coffee table book to a little tiny trade paperback. They've also been publishing some other stuff. Last year, they did Drew and Josh Allen Friedman's Warts and All, which I reviewed on the Rift last October, and they recently released Bill Griffith's From A to Zippy, a collection of his Zippy the Pinhead strip. They have 2 neat things coming up. In November, Cheap Novelties, The Pleasures of Urban Decay by Ben Katcher. This collects Katcher's Julius Knipple real estate photographer strip that is currently running in the New York Press. And in December, they will be releasing Twisted Sisters, a collection of bad girl art. It's edited by Diane Newman and features some of the best female alternative cartoonists, including Carol Leigh, Phoebe Gluckner, M.K. Brown, Carol Tyler, Dory Seda, and two of my personal favorites, Julie Doucette and Mary Fleener. This week's comic in review is Deadface, Doing the Islands with Bacchus, a 3-issue limited series by Eddie Campbell, published by Dark Horse. Campbell did an 8-issue Deadface limited series for Harrier in England, which is currently in Dark Horse's accumulation Deadface Immortality Isn't Forever. It's a story of the Greek gods in modern times, what's left of them anyway. They started aging and then started all killing each other, and a lot of them have died of natural causes too. Bacchus, who is the god of wine, god of song, the Romans called him Dionysius, and in modern times he'd probably be called the god of party! He looks like an old sailor. He tends to wander around drinking wine, telling stories. Campbell liked him so much that he gave him his own book, but it only lasted 2 issues. Bacchus then appeared in a bunch of stories in certain anthologies. A1, Dark Horse Presents, Trident. Campbell says, it is entirely apt that a vagabond, dissolute god should have been as homeless in the publishing realm as he is in a purely narrative sense. Bacchus is traveling around the Greek islands with his friend Simpsons, encountering old friends from Greece, former people from Atlantis, and telling more stories. There's no plot, really, just the laid-back storytelling with the occasional fire or orgy thrown in, for good measure. The stories involve things like ancient Greece, Atlantis, the history of fashion, Christianity, all sorts of stuff. Campbell's art is his usual sketchy style, but his backgrounds can go from minimalist simplicity to incredible complexity at the drop of a hat. You might find yourself reading this and wondering why you liked it so much, so you'll go back and read it and you still can't figure it out. Don't worry, just sit back and enjoy it. Deadface Doing the Islands with Bacchus is a 3-issue limited series. All 3 issues should be out by now. Published by Dark Horse Comics, 48 pages an issue, $2.95 an issue, and it's available at comic shops everywhere. That's it for Comic Art Commentary this week. Next week, I will be taking a look at Innovation's adaptations of Lost in Space and Quantum Leap, as well as providing the answer to the question, what does it mean now that Chris Claremont has left the X-Men? Back to you, Andrea.
It's pronounced Dionysus.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's one of those words I've always seen written and never knew how it was pronounced. Nobody's ever actually said it in my presence, so thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Correct that, folks. Just go back, rewind the tape, and just say that. Anyway.
Our memorable moment this week comes to us from Helga Borg, who writes, Dear Rifties.
Riftians, Rifties, these people can't make up their minds.
Rifties.
Right.
I would like to submit a memorable moment from the 60s British spy show, The Avengers. This show, which often had a science fiction bent, had its best years when the female lead was Mrs. Peel, particularly because these were the most tongue-in-cheek episodes, and partly for the all-around wonderfulness of Diana Rigg. My moment is from the episode The Masked Avenger. I'm not doing well tonight. Hey. The villain of the piece is a comic book-style superhero, and the episode has a number of transitions from drawn comic panels segueing into live action. This particular scene is the climax as Mrs. Peel and the Avenger face off on the ceiling. Note in particular the reference to an American adventure show that was an Avengers contemporary. Go on, what does she get?
Who gave you the silly pills this morning? She gets 3 books. She gets Harmony, a science fiction novel by Marjorie Bradley Kellogg. She also gets book 1 of the Black Hole Travel Agency series called Event Horizon, written by Jack McKinney, and also a reissue of an old fantasy book called The Worm Ouroboros, however the hell you pronounce that, written by E.R. Edison. Yeah, right, I'm not even going to try that. Also, Helga gets a genuine, as soon as I can get the thing unfolded here, Chronic Rift t-shirt. Isn't it beautiful? And here is the memorable moment.
has really got his wings clipped. Oh, thank you.
Hey! I'm coming down.
Be up.
It's the 22nd century. Science has perfected time travel. Through careful research, you have determined that if the ship the Lusitania had changed its course by 1 degree in any direction, the torpedo that sank it would have missed and all the people on board would have survived. So you use this great new technology to go back in time to be on the Lusitania. You argue with the captain of the ship till you are blue in the face to convince him to change the course in any direction by 1 degree, and finally, minutes before the torpedo is supposed to hit, you convince him. He changes course. And minutes later, a torpedo strikes the vessel, it sinks and everybody dies. You realize as the ship is sinking and you are about to die, that it was in fact because the ship had changed course at your urging that the torpedo actually hit it. Confused? Don't be. Writers of SF literature, TV, and movies have been doing things like this for years. That particular scenario is loosely based on an old Twilight Zone episode. From Robert A. Heinlein's classic short story, All You Zombies, to the latest Terminator and Back to the Future movies, time paradoxes have been a staple of all kinds of science fiction. With me and Andrea to talk about what makes a good time paradox are, over on my right is Dan Persons, a freelance writer on SF and the visual media who has contributed to such magazines as Cinefantastique. Over on my left is Ian Strock, assistant editor for both Analog and Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. And remotely by phone from his home in California is Tim Powers, author of a bunch of FNSF books, including the recently released The Stress of a Regard and the time paradox books, The Anubis Gates. Can you hear us, Tim?
Yes.
Okay. Ian, you go back in time. You kill your grandfather before your father can be born. Do you still exist?
Well, I sort of have to, because if I don't, then I haven't killed him, and then I can go back to kill him, and you're confusing us already.
All right.
You're causing paradoxes here.
Yes. Well, that's sort of the whole point.
But that was a good answer.
Yes, it was. It was a very good answer. What is it that makes a time paradox story work, do you think?
I don't think it's the paradox so much as the time travel aspect of the story. If there's a paradox, at least from most writers' points of view, they haven't finished their job yet. I think a lot of writers really dislike leaving a story hanging in a paradox.
Tim, you wrote a book that dealt with time paradoxes very extensively. What is your take on it? I mean, there's a lot of
I'd
different
say
ways
there, for one thing, if you can turn up my volume a little bit, I
Okay.
can hear you all better.
Okay, that's surprising it. Anyhow, what's your take on doing a time paradox?
Well, I think there are two basic types of time travel stories. One in which you can change the past, as in Bradbury's Sound of Thunder, in which they go back in time to kill dinosaurs on a big game hunting expedition, and one guy accidentally steps on a butterfly, and when they come back, it's to an entirely different world. And on the other hand, there's the sort of time travel story that I choose to write, which is, if you go back in time, no matter what you do, you find you are only fulfilling the role of making happen what happened anyway, like your story about the Lusitania.
Okay. One, on the other hand, then there's the other end of that would be like the Back to the Future movies, where history has changed rather thoroughly. Recently, Terminator 2 was released, and that had a whole time paradox in it that was sort of unsatisfying. Do you think?
Well, the entire movie was unsatisfying,
Well,
I
that's-
thought.
yeah, right,
but
For the purposes of this discussion,
beyond that, I think one of the things that I feel about the Terminator is actually they got the story completely backwards. If you think about it, the first Terminator comes back, fails in killing the kid, and the U.S. government, according to the backstory, will use the chips from that robot's arm to build the computer system that will eventually build the robots that will try to destroy mankind. If the child is destroyed in part 2, the robots of the future won't send back the first Terminator, so the chips won't be obtained, and the computer won't be built. Therefore, the robots would kill themselves by actually trying to kill the child after the arm has been sent back. So strictly speaking, the robots should have been the ones to protect the kid, And the good guys, the rebels, should have been the one trying to kill the kids.
Well, I am thoroughly lost.
Welcome to time paradoxes.
Yes, right, that's the whole point. Well, then there was also the question of in the second movie, Linda Hamilton's character then goes and blows up the cybernetics lab, which causes a whole other problem. In that case, then the world can't be created, in which case the guy can't come back, because part of the whole time paradox of the first movie was that the guy who's part of the resistance, he's admired all along, turns out to be his father also. So.
That's true. Well, I figure that a lot of that part of it will be answered, of course, in Terminator Part 3.
It is scary.
But sometimes it seems to go kind of like a Greek tragedy. I mean, with something, and you get something from an oracle or from the fates that say, okay, this is what's going to happen. You know, Mrs. Edifice, your son's going to sleep with you. So you do this entire thing, and you go through this whole process, and all you find out is that you just somehow even made it happen. So, I mean, sometimes with the paradox is what Tim was just talking about. I mean, sometimes in your effort to change the past, like with the Lusitania,
right.
you're making it happen instead.
They can be very confusing.
The thing is, what I find is, as far as the going back and killing your grandfather thing, I mean, science fiction has been trying to handle that, and actually it was handled in a minor way in Back to the Future Part 2. If you watch that film, there is a whole central sequence where Dr. Brown explains exactly how Hill Valley got transformed. He draws one timeline, which is supposed to be the regular Hill Valley. Then he draws a branch off of the timeline and extends that, which is the evil Hill Valley. Right. He leaves both lines on, suggesting that there could actually be two different timelines.
Well, in fact, there's actually three the way it works, because there was the original one that we had at the beginning of the first movie. Then it had a whole new one that showed up at the end of the first movie that was still intact at the end of the third movie. You know, you've got all these different things, and yet one of them seems to be subsuming the other. Yeah, in a more sophisticated way, George Alec Effinger sort of suggested this idea in the story Schrodinger's Kitten, which is a very good story, by the way. And but the suggestion that at any decision point in the universe, time could actually split into multiple decision points. By this idea, you could go back, kill your grandfather, you would still remain alive, because you would split off into an alternate timeline where you would basically be a tourist. Yeah, that's something that Marvel Comics also set up in their superhero comics. Whenever anytime anybody time travels, it creates an alternate reality. Yeah. And which
I have a lot of trouble with that theory, only because where does the energy and the mass come from to create this alternate reality? There's not all that much power in a decision. If I decide to pick up the glass or not, I don't know, I have trouble with that.
Do you have less trouble with the time paradox, like someone coming back and...
I think I prefer, as you were talking about, the Greek tragedy, which seems to make more sense, that it's all predestined because you're going to do it because you've already done it. I think Heinlein did that rather well in By His Bootstraps, and showed trying to not do it, and you find yourself doing it again anyway.
Yeah.
Tim, do you see any other way of looking at it besides the one that you just mentioned a few minutes ago? I mean, would you?
Well, yeah, you can. You could have, as in, say, Robert Silverberg's Down the Line, you could have it so that people can travel back in time and actually make the past different. Like Silverberg had so many tourists go to attend the crucifixion of Christ that all the hills were just covered with these people with cameras and Bermuda shorts. You kind of have to make up your mind before you start the story which way you're going to have it work. Like, of course, the classic time travel story is, say, Heinlein's By His Bootstraps, in which everything is predetermined, and no matter what you do, you find yourself only fulfilling, what you were supposed to do in the first place. The alternative is like Silverberg, or even in a sort of middle case, like Fritz Leiber in his Change War stories, where there is something he calls the law of conservation of reality, so that if you prevent somebody from being shot through the head with a bullet, they will tend to step outside and get punctured through the head with a meteorite. That the universe will tend to fill up the holes and kind of fulfill the story.
In David Gerald's The Man Who Folded Himself, there, I mean, you have a man who goes back and forth in time, and there he creates, he goes into the theory of how you make an alternate universe, an alternate parallel universe, every time you make a decision. So what keeps happening is he keeps bouncing back and forth, and he can undo decisions, but he can also go to some place in the future and meet himself, and meet another one of himself, and another one of himself, and another one of himself. So he and all of his selves get together, they play poker. They also get intimate with each other for about half the book, which is very strange. But he describes the time travel as the original timeline is a black line that is drawn, and instead of erasing it, you paint a white line over it. So the black line is still there, but the white line is the new line that's over it, but they're both coexisting.
Yeah. That still goes back to Ian's question of where does the energy come from for us? So, you know, it's like, what is this creating out of? Is there just sort of this stuff floating around? Okay, let's grab some more reality here. You know.
It's a lot of the reason why more filmmakers haven't really tried to do time paradoxes. I think in a large aspect, filmmakers tend to approach time paradoxes as if we ignore it, maybe it'll go away.
Even a time travel thing like Doctor Who, they tended to avoid that. There was something they whipped out every once in a while called the Blinovich limitation effect, which was basically a writer's gag, which is basically like, we don't want to explain this, you know, so we're just going to dance around it a little bit.
There were also the time loops in Doctor Who, where it appears they had like about a 30-second copy break at the end of each loop for characters to spout some new dialogue. So, the thing about The Man Who Folded Himself is that David Gerald basically took one little kernel of a time paradox and worked that into an entire book. The problem with time paradoxes is they're very cerebral. They're more mind games than anything else, and visually, I mean, Steven Spielberg film can't pause to ponder all the implications of time paradoxes.
Doesn't even always work. The scene you mentioned, but in Back to the Future 2, is kind of a clunky scene.
Yes.
You know, because you've got to, okay, let's stop, hold it, explain, here you go, you know, sketches, diagrams.
It's one of the classic now tell me doctor sort of scenes. Now tell me doctor, what is this time paradox about?
And oh God, I blanked. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's also the question of if you do go back and then change all of existence in front of you, which would probably change from doing something, then how did you get back in the first place? Because you've probably not invented the time machine in this alternate reality if you still exist, if you've been able to change it.
That's
I
true.
was reading a few.
Similar problem at the end of Back to the Future Part 2. Marty McFly sees Doc Brown get zapped by lightning and zapped back to the 19th century. He immediately runs back to the 1960s, Doc Brown, and tells him about it. By all logic, the future Doc Brown should then know about it and be able to avoid the lightning.
And I think one of the problems actually that a lot of time paradox stories have is that they don't always want to get into the really heavy aspects. It's one of the things that's impressive about All You Zombies. In All You Zombies, the same guy is his own wife, husband, son, father, mother, recruiter, you know, the guy who actually sends him off, and he actually gets to set it up where he gets to, in a sense, create himself, because he sets it up the way he has himself after the sex change, meeting himself, and having the kid who also winds up being himself. And it's scary, really. And I think it's a problem sometimes is that sometimes time travel stories won't approach that. You know, they sort of back away from that a little.
It's way too...
Also, hello.
Yeah.
Sure.
Also, a factor of All You Zombies is that he doesn't so much do it as conform to it. When I was writing The Newest Gates, it occurred to me that if I had a time machine I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. If I was to take the complete Edgar Allan Poe works and go back in time and meet Edgar Allan Poe when he was 10 years old, and if I was to hand him this book and say, Edgar, do you want to be famous? Copy a story or poem out of this every now and then and have it published.
We have to cut you off there, Tim. We're being given the wrap it up sign, unfortunately. We have to cut this off. This has been a really good discussion, though. Thank you all for coming on. Thank you, Tim, for sitting on the phone. And next week we will have a special TV report from Orenthal Hawkins called Couch Potato Salad, continuing our little area segments. And we will also be introducing you to the Society for Creative Anachronism. And I'm looking at the wrong camera. Beautiful. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Good night.
This episode was sponsored in part by Comics Interview, the magazine where both the fans and the pros turn to see who's who and how it's done. Read Comics Interview number 100 and see who the 100 most powerful people in the comics industry are. For a free catalog, write to Comics Interview, 234 5th Avenue, Suite 301, New York, New York, 10001. Omega Zone, a store specializing in comic books and video movie rentals, including science fiction, horror, animation, and cult films you won't find at your local video store. Now at a new location, 258 West 15th Street, between 7th and 8th Avenues, in Manhattan. Telephone 212-645-6941. Door Books Incorporated, a leading publisher of science fiction, fantasy, and horror since 1971. For a free catalog, write to Door Books Incorporated, Department T, 375 Hudson Street, New York, New York, 10014. Omni Magazine is proud to be a sponsor of the Chronic Rift. Pick up the latest Omni at your local newsstand, or call 1-800-289-6664 for subscription information. The best in time travel and alternate history adventure from Baen Books, including the Draka Trilogy by S.M. Sterling, The Glory That Was by L. Sprague de Camp, and The Lincoln Hunters by Wilson Tucker. And watch for this powerful alternate fantasy novel, Flame Weaver, by Margaret Ball, coming in December, only from Baen Books.